How these children are being told that there's just this fixed destiny because they have dyslexia, because they have Down syndrome, because they have ADHD. So when I asked the question, what is going on in the brain of a child with Down syndrome or dyslexia, they said, we don't know. No one could answer me any of the questions I was asking. I had the birth of my beautiful daughters and my sons, and when my daughter came into the world, Erin first, and she was diagnosed with dyslexia. So that then helped me develop this movement program for kids. Even Erin says to me, you know, I just feel so different. She loves reading books now, and she no longer struggles with reading, no longer struggles with writing. Then my second daughter, who got diagnosed with Down syndrome, and I didn't really know much about Down syndrome, neither did my wife. And one of the questions was, could you just tell me what's going on in the brain of a child with Down syndrome? And that was where I started to delve in deeper, because the restrictions that are put on them is unbelievable. Sarah was born predominantly with deaf, so she needed hearing aids. A good 12 months from when I really went intensified on the exercise and didn't miss any days. And her hearing is better than, I can guarantee you, mine and yours. And her eye test results just kept getting better and better, to the point where she no longer needed her glasses. If only you knew the exercises that she'd been performing. I just needed answers. And that's when I started to delve into the brain science. I did sport and exercise science, studying at Teesside University, and then from there, when I graduated, I worked at Virgin Active Gym, predominantly in strength conditioning, passed on the knowledge, and then rehab developed onto that, which then moved me into kinesiology. And then from there, I had the birth of my beautiful daughters and my sons, and when my daughter came into the world, Erin first, and she was diagnosed with dyslexia. So that then helped me develop this movement program for kids, and as you can see, some of the signs in the background, they were some of the t-shirts that they progressed onto when they could perform specific movements to help rebalance the brain, especially with dyslexia as well, because teachers had completely ruled her out of education and said she's going to get swallowed up in high school, which she's now 17 and she's passed all the GCSEs and she's doing really well. She's doing her A-levels now as well, which is amazing. And then my second daughter, who got diagnosed with Down syndrome, and I didn't really know much about Down syndrome, neither did my wife. And when I found out, I started to research. As you could imagine, as a father, you know, I absolutely, you know, bawled my eyes out in the beginning. Just didn't know what was going on. We weren't told anything about it. Even the birth was pretty much a negative response, and it was complete silence, and as if it was a terrible thing, because, you know, my wife's given birth to this child with Down syndrome, which I thought was, reflecting back, which I just thought was a terrible response from the caring nurses. But I think it needs to be celebrated in much the way any other child is born, and it should be a celebration. And this is for all the parents who are giving birth to, you know, kids with chromosomal abnormalities. And, you know, later on, I delved into it more, and I was just constantly, you know, overburdened with everything that Sarah won't be able to perform, and it just didn't make sense. And understanding the brain and the body as well, you know, speaking to the pediatric neurologist, a lovely guy, but just didn't have a clue on looking at the brain from a developmental point of view. Even if there is a chromosomal abnormality, I'm a huge believer that these children, any children with a chromosomal abnormality, can develop the brain, including anyone with brain injuries, any pathologies. I just think we should look at it from a developmental point of view.
So the neuroscience part that came in with your first daughter, Erin, is that right? Is that what
the neuroscience?
On the path of,
yeah. So
she's got dyslexia. How can I support her challenges with dyslexia? And what age did you know that Erin had dyslexia, and what made you think about?
It was quite late, Steve. So Erin was really athletic. So she's a born athlete. She's GB wrestling champion. Only been doing it a year, and she's taken the title. She's a very, very athletic individual. Super strong, very coordinated, very flexible. A typical what people would refer to as the epitome of an athlete. If you watch her move, she can adapt to any sport, any movements. But in what happens with dyslexia, because they have these gross motor skills, but it's their fine motor skills that they struggle with, but no one ever taught us. So dyslexia is then governed by a set of behaviours, and based on them set of behaviours, especially fine motor control or reading and writing, they're going to struggle academically. But that's because no one had taught us as parents. No one gave us anything to talk about how these dysfunctions or imbalances can all be improved. Instead, we label these children like with dyslexia, and the child wasn't prepared for academic education because the fine motor skills hadn't developed correctly. So how on earth could we expect children to then perform in an academic setting if the basic foundations haven't developed, like fine motor skills?
And eyesight's got something to do with
dyslexia?
Yeah.
So visual system, obviously without your correct vision, if we're not converging correctly, if we're not seeing things in the correct way, then how do we expect to read? Because if we're getting a set of information in one eye faster than the other, then that will start to confuse the brain, and the brain goes into these processes and it causes confusion. So it's not that they don't have the ability to read or write, it's because we've got to develop these sensory functions correctly, including these primitive reflexes, which are all improved by movement. Movement is the only thing that can improve them, sensory and from a primitive training program as well.
So what you're telling me, you improved Erin's physical capabilities and movements, and this improved her academically?
Well, huge. If you look back at Erin as well, Erin didn't really crawl for very long. So I was one of them encouraging fathers. I've always been into fitness myself, and I thought if she's walking faster, then that means she's highly advanced. But unfortunately, what I've now realised, studying for my working doctorate and my PhD, you realise that the individuals that miss the crawling phase will have a higher chance of developing dyslexia, because it's the first stages is where the brain starts to integrate these important reflexes like the symmetric tonic neck reflex and the asymmetric tonic neck reflex, which also contributes to muscle tone, but also contributes to the two hemispheres developing. And it integrates these autonomic responses, what we refer to as primitive reflexes. Now, if the child remains in this involuntary control, then it'll be very difficult for them to perform the voluntary control that we need them to perform in academic education, or the academic teachers want them to perform. But that's very difficult for a brain that's not inhibited these involuntary actions. And that's what we commonly see now with a lot of these developmental disorders now, especially the ones that don't have any genetic mutation and they don't have any chromosomal mutations or abnormalities.
So how did you learn this? Where did you go to get this information?
Well, my daughters were a huge inspiration, because when you've been told that your child is going to be put into this fixed set of symptoms, let's say, and this is something that is now ruling and is a fixed destiny for them, I just couldn't, I just needed answers. And that's when I started to delve into the brain science, and speaking to a lot of the psychologists, psychiatrists, speaking to the pediatric neurologists, and no one could answer me any of the questions I was asking, which then made me question the healthcare model in how these children are being told that there's just this fixed destiny because they have dyslexia, because they have Down syndrome, because they have ADHD. I just thought it just makes no sense when the health professionals couldn't answer any of the questions. And one of the questions was, could you just tell me what's going on in the brain of a child with Down syndrome? And that was where I started to delve in deeper, because the restrictions that are put on them is unbelievable. And it's not that they don't have the ability to learn, but I just think we have to encourage parents to really understand brain development.
And what do they tell you about the brain of a child that's got Down syndrome or dyslexia or any developmental disorder?
Yeah,
So
the moment they're diagnosed, you've got to remember they're either going to be sent to the psychiatrist or psychologist or the pediatric neurologist or the neurologist. So any forms of developmental disorders, they're the professions you're gonna get seen by, and them professions govern all these disorders by a set of behavioural symptoms. And in order to understand how this system was developed, you have to really understand the origins of these symptoms. So they were telling me basically, because Sarah has Down syndrome, we don't actually know what's going on in the brain. So when I asked the question, what is going on in the brain of a child with Down syndrome or dyslexia, they said, we don't know. And I just thought that was good enough for me to go, well, if you don't know the answer to that question, then how can we even predict how my child's behaviours are going to develop?
Well, they said they didn't know what was going on, but they told you that she was specifically going to get...
Yeah, so one of the symptoms was, my child's possibly not going to walk till she's 4. There was lots of saying, with it being an intellectual disability, that if we have another child, that child will overtake that child with Down syndrome. And there was nothing that encouraged any success stories.
When you say overtake, what do you mean?
So the development, so if we were to have a third child, then that third child, although they'll be younger, will overtake them in development, movements, academics, intellectual, thinking, cognition.
So they put a limit on Sarah's...
They put a huge limit, yeah.
Academic future,
everything,
physical
everything,
future, her health.
Everything. So currently...
What was her specific limits on her health?
Specific limits, the current one is they believe that all children with Down syndrome are going to develop thyroid problems. And, it was fascinating because I'm sat with the GP and I'm being highly respectful, but I don't think they realise that this is what I also do for a living, but from the angle of trying to improve these symptoms like I've done with my own kids. And it was fascinating what the doctor said to me, that she'll need medication. Basically I said, look, she's going through a very stressful moment in school because she's just changed classes. And with Sarah, she doesn't actually get on with individuals with any forms of intellectual disabilities or developmental disorders. She likes to be with people who are a lot more able than individuals who struggle to coordinate behaviour or coordinate emotions. So they're in a class and there's a few children who are quite loud, and it puts Sarah into a state of stress. And some of the symptoms you see whenever a child is in a state of stress, it goes into what's called the fight, flight and freeze response. And the moment any child that's in a fight, flight or freeze response, you can't access the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest, digest and growth response. So they come to a halt. So you can't get any growth whatsoever. So that's going to create some abnormalities in the blood. If any child was given a blood test, because they take this tiny substrate of information from only one part of the body, if there's any stress running through the body, it's going to show abnormal readings. And whatever they're searching for, it's going to show some abnormality because there's a huge dysfunction biochemically because the brain's protecting itself from stress. So I mentioned this to the doctor and I said, look, can you please do another blood test because Sarah is currently going through immense stress.
So what did the blood test show that they did originally?
So the blood test didn't show that the readings were above, but they said it's slightly increased. So although they were still within the normal...
What specifically increased in the blood?
The thyroxine.
Okay.
Yeah, so the TH markers.
Okay.
So if the markers are slightly higher, then they assume that they need to be put on medication, but never once are you ever told...
But you put that down to stress.
It was definitely stress.
You believe the markers were down to stress, like
100% it was, because the evidence then came through is when we waited and she agreed, okay, stress can play a part. If stress can play a part in creating blood readings to be abnormal, then how many individuals are we medicalising so wrong? And that's what we're getting now. It's a huge medicalised program that, and I hugely believe this, it's medicalising individually wrong, because no one's looking at the stress response with these individuals. And if they are highly stressed due to not sleeping correctly, due to environmental factors, the job satisfactions, the relationships, whatever it is, if that's causing immense stress and that's going to cause some abnormalities in the brain, it's going to cause some abnormalities in the body as well. And because of the blood test, when we then redid the blood test in 6 months' time or 3 months' time, we made sure Sarah was in a parasympathetic state and the blood readings were completely normal. So, and not only that, when the blood readings came back, they initially told us to take the medication, and when the blood readings, but we didn't give her the medication, the blood readings came back normal. We got about, my wife got about 3 to 4 missed calls, I think it was, from the doctor saying, do not take the medication. But you imagine if I didn't request another blood reading, which most parents would just listen to the advice of the doctor. But the way the body functions is through balancing out these two systems. And yes, we need some elements of stress, but that's only if there's a lion coming to chase you, or there's danger that you had to face. Then yeah, we need an element of anxiety and we need an element of fear. That's healthy. But if the child's in a state of involuntary and autonomic stress, then there's no way in the world we're going to access this rest, digest and growth, and no amount of medication will ever govern that or ever develop it. It just will not happen. So yeah, Sarah's now kept within the range, and I'm a huge believer she'll remain in the range.
So she's never been on thyroid medication?
She's never taken any medication
her thyroid's in perfectly normal levels?
Yeah. But they're absolutely adamant and convinced that Sarah will need medication for thyroid.
So out of people that suffer with Down syndrome out there, how many of them do you think are on medication for thyroid?
Well, honestly, basing it on what the doctor almost expectations are, from my own experience, I believe every single one of them. I'll be very, very surprised.
And what does this medication potentially do long term for them?
Well, it basically shuts off your own receptors in producing thyroxine because you're given more of it. But we haven't looked at the cause of why the thyroxine's inhibited. And if we're not looking at the cause, then we're potentially going against an intelligence that is far more intelligent than most doctors. And especially medicalising or prescribing medication to try and correct something where the cause hasn't been corrected. It's just a backward way of doing science, in my opinion. And
what else did the experts tell you in terms of her other sensory systems, eyesight, hearing?
Well, there was, when Sarah was born born predominantly with deaf, so she needed hearing aids. So she had hearing loss where she was completely deaf, and she needed glasses, and it was almost like this common bias. Yeah, this is just their sensory systems. The ear canals are quite narrow, so they need to wear them, and it's quite common within Down syndrome. And Sarah had hearing aids in both ears, couldn't really hear much.
From what age?
From pretty much birth, very early on. So about 1 year old, and then 2 years, she needed the hearing aids. And then from there, I read and looked into a book for a vision, first of all. And I was coming across these amazing scientists who had done this amazing work. And one of them, who's regarded one of the best, he's an eye scientist, but before he became an eye scientist, he was an optometrist. And he was a fascinating guy, Dr. Jacob Lieberman, and I read his work, Take Off Your Glasses and See was one of his books, and I really recommend it for individuals who wear glasses and have developed into wearing glasses, because you'll realise the eyes are just like a muscle. It's governed by the brain, although optometrists don't believe that. But read about that guy. He's now an eye scientist. He's done some amazing research, and he's now individuals where the reason what made him go into it was because in optometry was realising everyone that needed glasses weren't coming back any better. They needed a different prescription, and he wanted to delve, because most optometrists themselves wear glasses. So he wanted to find out why this was happening. Why weren't people getting better if I'm prescribing them with these glasses, which not many people in the healthcare look outside the box. We're given a set of instructions, certain set of literature, and we're missing all the other literature that's out there as well, and where these amazing scientists have created some amazing results with people. And with a lot of his patients, they were wearing glasses, and because of his method through eyesight training, they no longer needed the glasses. So I thought, this sounds amazing, I'll do it with Sarah. And I took her through the same program with the vision exercises that Dr. Lieberman had prescribed, and her eye test results just kept getting better and better, to the point where she no longer needed her glasses.
So talk to us about that moment when you were preparing for one of the tests, and the doctor, the eye specialist, was expecting to put her on a heavier prescription, and you were the first time you showed up to this appointment because you've been doing the exercise.
So my wife's been showing up, and then my wife says, look, you need to go to this appointment, and I went, and we were sat there, and this the eye specialist was looking in her eyes, and he had to do almost like a treble test just to make sure that what he's seeing is correct, because and I've still got the form to prove, you know, her eyesight had balanced and it had improved significantly, where she didn't need glasses anymore, so she could see everything they were asking her. And he couldn't believe it. So I said to him, is this quite common, you know, with individuals with Downs, or with anyone? Is it quite common that their eyesight improves? And his answer was sublime. He said, basically, yeah, well, she's had a growth spurt. And I just, deep down, I was laughing, but I was just thinking, gosh, you know, if only you knew the exercises that she's been performing, and how it could hugely benefit a lot of your patients. I was thinking, but I thought, he's a lovely guy, and he means well. But to put it down to a growth spurt I just thought it was a typical egotistical level to show I don't actually know. But I think that's the only response I can give here, because they do have to take height and weight as well, so they could see her height as increased.
So specifically, I mean, how long did that take? And and what was her vision like when you started, and what was her vision like after? So was it?
Well, basically, practically, she's blind, so when she's, you can't really see, so balance will slightly be off. Her letters will be off.
So she couldn't see?
She couldn't really, at all. No, so, yeah, so when Sarah would have had to be at the paper like this in order to write. And then as vision started to improve, she's more upright as she's writing. She's no longer like this.
How long did that process take from when you started doing the exercises to when you went back to
a good 12 months. A good 12 months from when I really went intensified on the exercise and didn't miss any days. Whereas prior to that, within overall, sporadically on and off, about 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for a year, 12 months, and she went from practically being blind to not needing glasses at all?
Yeah, absolutely, at all. Where she'll refuse to even put them on, and they still recommend that she wears them, although we've got the proof that she don't need the glasses.
How old was she when that happened? With the eyesight?
Yeah, so she's now, I would say, 13.
Amazing. So
Yeah.
what did she say to you when she could see stuff? Was she saying like, Daddy, I can see colours, I can see...
Well, no, it's just in behaviours. She doesn't really know what's, you know...
She didn't realise her eyesight had improved or at 13?
Oh, yeah, because she was just refusing. I'm not wearing them. And although even it's been advised for her to wear them, although she didn't need them, she refuses to wear them. Even in school, she's like, no.
And then you improved her hearing as well. So they said that she was going to be blind, and she was. I mean, from 1 year old, she couldn't hear much at all.
Yeah.
So when did you start improving her hearing, and how did you go about learning about that?
So auditory training was a massive fascination, just because I looked into Sally Goddard Barth's work, and she was like this musician, and she was heavily influencing and bringing this groundbreaking sort of primitive reflex work into play. And with the auditory responses with Sarah, and it was just about stimulating the hearing. So if you don't stimulate hearing, the body aligns itself to then not wanting to hear, because it needs stimulating, the senses need stimulating. It's how we develop the brain. And there's no ruptures in any of the optic nerves for the eyes, and there's no ruptures in the cochlea or anything with the auditory processing. So there was still the connections that were going on. But I was told, because they have narrow ear canals, it means they'll struggle to hear. But that's not the case, because Sarah no longer needs a hearing aids, and her hearing is better than, I can guarantee you, mine and yours. And most people who believe they hear, that girl can hear absolutely anything. And that was purely through stimulation of music. And we just played music in one ear to try and get that part of the brain, especially which influences the gross motor skills as well. And once we did that, we then stimulated the other ear, and then before you know it, as she's going for the hearing test, each time the hearing test is getting better and better and better. And there's still no explanation, and no one knows what I've done to this day. No health professionals really know. And my wife always said, you should tell them. And I said, it just wasn't the moment to tell them, because when you speak to people in conversation, I think when you're, but it's also just to give hope to parents that, look, I've got a daughter who's got a chromosomal abnormality, and you know, a lot of these children that are being told and diagnosed from a set of symptoms, and I know parents are forever caring and they love their children, but to try and encourage, and I know it's highly almost encouraged now in today's world, because as parents we're not given any manuals in how to parent children, but I think ultimately the goal here is to try and see the brain as developmental, regardless of whatever behavioural symptoms they're based on. Knowing your child doesn't have any genetic mutation, and I honestly I don't believe they'll ever find one, because I've actually interviewed the psychiatrist who governed the DSM, which governs all psychiatric disorders, and I'm telling you now, there'll never ever be a gene that will cause any of these problems. These are purely done from environmental lifestyle habits, and it's understanding how this brain develops. And if we have a level of understanding, it should be taught in schools, that if children are taught how our brains are developed, I think that's where the prevention starts, and that's the goal.
So Erin specifically, has she got dyslexia anymore?
No, even Erin says to me, you know, I just feel so different. She loves reading books now, and she no longer struggles with reading, no longer struggles with writing, and she passed all her English, so yeah, she's doing really well.
Specifically, what work did you do to improve her dyslexia symptoms?
Yeah, when I found out, I started a movement program for kids, and it was specifically for Erin and other children. And I have a lot of parents who have, you know, children that are struggling academically or emotionally or mentally or physically. And I started this class, and it was just to try and encourage more movement, to try and rebalance Erin's brain. And then before you knew it, it just grew and grew and grew. And then I took it online, and then I just couldn't do it all myself. And yes, schools then wanted me to try and bring it into schools, but then a lot of the teachers, and I know a teacher, and if Rose is ever watching, she had to leave because she was really passionate about the program, but she just never got the support from the head teacher, and it really would have changed,
so how long
kids' lives.
ago did you start this program?
This was probably about how old is Erin now? 17. So 11, 6 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
6
you
years.
noticed huge successes
Huge.
with Sarah, or did you
Yeah,
already
well, but
have the
all of them,
successes
all
with
of them,
Sarah?
Sarah, Erin, Adam, they were
Yeah.
all coming to
You
the
got
class.
4. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, I've got 4, and Aidan is he's 5 now. But yeah, he wasn't around back then. But Adam, Erin and Sarah were in the class, and then I had many more. But yeah, and then once I understand about brain development with Erin and Sarah, my 2 boys now, well,
They just benefit.
Adam's just, yeah, he's just phenomenal, an athlete, and also just incredible academically. He's just recently got his highest score in SATs, and he doesn't even know how. He's just a kid that just absorbs, and Aidan is exactly the same. And I'm hugely convinced it's to do with these understanding brain development and understanding these primitive reflexes. I think they're the absolute foundations in order for a child to then access this voluntary
So is this
control.
where the t-shirts came from? What was the course called, and what are the t-shirts all about?
Yes, so it was called Fit Kids, and it was to try and promote more fitness in kids, but ultimately it was to try and create more movement within kids, because I believe, like with Erin missing crawling, I think that played a huge part. When I looked at the research, it plays a huge part on the reading skills and writing skills. And I just thought if I can just put that information back in, I think it will hugely benefit them. But it was basically a program called Fit Kids, and it was about giving the kids the best start ever. As you can see, I put it there, giving your kids the best start ever. And the t-shirt before that, it was a nice quote which every individual that started up was given. So on enrolling on the course, every individual was given the t-shirt, and then they'll all, turn up in it. And it was about giving them a great start, and they didn't have to be great in the beginning, but they needed to start in order to be great. And that was the quote on the t-shirt. And then once they could perform a series of movements, then they developed onto the champion level, and then from the champion level they moved on to the advanced level, and then from the advanced they moved on to the elite level, and then from the elite they then moved on to the warrior. And it was basically a step-by-step program which consisted of yoga movements to gymnastic movements to coordinated movements to stability, and they had to perform these specific movements before they leveled up. And you could see kids in the class that were so withdrawn to then, by the time they've achieved the blue and the green t-shirts, they're no longer withdrawn, they're now vocal, they're now sharing their ideas, and it was incredible just to see that, and the parents giving the feedback as well. It was absolutely incredible.
So you were coping, you were dealing with kids and helping kids with severe mental disorders, developmental disorders. Talk to us about some of the kids that came in and how severe some of their symptoms were, and then specifically the work you did at the beginning to. It was
a lot of them. You tend to find were struggling with what they referred to as anxiety. Some were suicidal. Some just thought being dead was better than being alive, and I just thought that was really sad. And these are lovely parents as well, but unfortunately, as parents, we're just not taught how the brain develops. So once we rebalance the brains with these individuals who were suicidal, they were depressed, ADHD, autism, and we had mild levels of individual with autism. I don't think the program was to a level where it works with severe autism, and I think parents naturally believe it's a disorder that's fixed. I don't believe it's fixed, and if it is, I believe there's certain skills that they're genius in, and we're not here to remove the genius level skills, but there's also skills they're very highly immature in. And I think the question arises is, if they have these genius level skills, what makes us think we can't upskill them in these immature skills? Because somehow they managed to develop these genius level skills. So it was looking at the brain from the immature, the weaknesses, very much like the body. If someone's stronger on one side and they're weaker on the other, we try and balance out the weakness, and the brain's exactly the same. These behaviours are just a set of immature skills, and I looked at the body through movements, and I just believe movements is what every child is given before they can talk. They're always moving before they can talk, before they have any voluntary functions or making choices on what to eat. They've also got to move, and it's these reflexive movements that they've got to demonstrate and perform before they perform in a coordinated and stable way. And I just think it plays a huge part on brain development. I think nature demonstrates that very, very well.